Good morning, biology students. It's Mr. Olson. I think today is day 36 of our distance learning. We've got about 4 weeks of school left. Hang in there. I wanted to spend a little time talking today about what we're doing this week and then kind of lay out the last 3 weeks of school for you. Okay. So, um, we've been talking about ecology. We spent some time looking at biomes, right? We looked at biomes quite a bit. We looked at biogeochemical cycles. We're going to be looking at climate change, human impact, and then succession. Okay, these are the three things we want, and then we've kind of wrapped up biomes. Okay, next week we're going to be looking at population dynamics, looking at things like niches, which you guys know is on your final project, population growth curves, carrying capacity, and limiting factors. These things are going to be helpful to know as you wrap up and finish up your final project. And also things like interactions and relationships, predator-prey relationships, things like parasites, and then competition between organisms, okay? And lastly, looking at energy flow. We've done a lot of this. We've looked at food webs already. A lot of you have your food webs already done. And then trophic levels like primary producers, primary consumers, so on and so forth. So as we look at ecology, these are our four facets, right? Biomes and human impact, interactions and relationships, energy flow, and population dynamics. We are walking through these over time. We've spent time in some of these and are still have some to learn. And so we're going to finish up with this green section though, okay? And so let's look at climate change then today and human impact a little bit. To understand climate change, you first have to understand the greenhouse effect, okay? So the greenhouse effect is basically what happens in a greenhouse. A light comes in, it hits all the plants in a greenhouse, or all the objects, I should say, the soil, the lumber, whatever's in there, and it warms everything up. And the greenhouse traps the heat, right? As light from the sun comes in at a certain wavelength, it hits our planet. It hits all the objects on the planet, the Earth in general, the ocean, everything, right? Well, when that light energy hits things on the planet, that light gets converted into heat energy or radiant energy. Well, that's a different wavelength than light. And so, as that light energy is able to pass right through our atmosphere, it hits objects, transfers the energy to those objects, warms them up. That heat energy then leaves those objects. Sometimes you can see that on like a road or something like that. You kind of see those heat ripples above there. You see that radiant energy leaving. Well, because it's a different wavelength, it can't escape. And so most of it just kind of gets trapped in that atmosphere, or I should say, in the, I guess, lower parts of the atmosphere, gets trapped within our planet, though. And so as light comes in, warms up our planet, that heat then tries to escape and it can't because of the gases in our atmosphere. And so we call those gases that trap that heat greenhouse gases. Okay, they absorb infrared energy or infrared waves. Okay, this is going to raise the temperature of our planet. Okay, and so think of it as the thicker our atmosphere is, or the more greenhouse gases we have, the more heat you're going to trap, the warmer you get. Okay, the Earth averages about 57 degrees Fahrenheit rather than -3 Fahrenheit as a result. And so it's really good that we do have the greenhouse effect. Otherwise, it'd be very, very cold and life would be very, very difficult on this planet. And so we want the greenhouse effect. That's a good thing. We just have to kind of keep it in check. Okay. The more greenhouses we get, the warmer we get. We've already said that. Um, let's look at those greenhouse gases. I guess the biggest one that people don't really talk about is water. Water vapor in the air is the biggest greenhouse gas. It contributes anywhere between a third up to two-thirds ish of the greenhouse effect of the warming of the planet is just caused by water vapor in the air, right? And this isn't something we really have control of. And so scientists tend not to talk about this. What do they talk about? They talk about some of these other guys, okay? Things like carbon dioxide, right? And you look at these numbers and you say, gosh, that's a pretty big variability between your low end and high end. Why is that? Well, studying the planet is really, really tough. There's so many variables. You can't quite pinpoint one single number because those numbers are always in flux, right? Things are always changing, which makes your data and your study very, very difficult. And so You will see some fluctuation there, but number 2 on our list is carbon dioxide. We breathe out carbon dioxide. Burning fossil fuels releases carbon dioxide. We talked about this in our biogeochemical cycles, and that's why we talked about it then, right? Understanding what's going on our planet makes more sense when you understand how some of these big atoms or big macronutrients like carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, phosphorus, how those move through your biosphere. And so carbon dioxide is number 2 on our list. This stuff, methane, CH4, notice it's carbon based, you just add some hydrogens to it, is number 3. And then things like nitrous oxide and then chlorofluorocarbons, some of these weird gases that you probably wouldn't run into very often, make up, a really, really small fraction of it. So essentially water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, and then things like nitrous oxide and then chlorofluorocarbons. Okay, these are the main greenhouse gases that warm up our planet. Okay, what sort of things cause climate change? Well, geez, everything essentially, right? The atmosphere, the oceans, how much snow cover we have, sea ice, fossil fuels, solar radiation, the Earth's rotation, Earth orbit, nutrient cycling, vegetation, overpopulation. That's just to name a few, right? There's all kinds of things that cause climate change. And I think scientists' big question is um, to what effect do humans have on the climate, right? And the variability of the temperature. And so that's kind of the big debate. I do have this video. I'm going to post this for you. That way you've got it and kind of look through it. As we look at climate change, what are some things we know? What are some things we don't know? Okay. We know the climate is changing. We don't really have a perfect understanding of or a definite quantitative answer for as to what extent human activity is causing it, right? We also know that this is not the warmest the Earth has ever been. We have been a lot warmer a long time ago. Um, what we don't know is how warm can we get and still maintain our lifestyle, right? That's everything's moot point because humans are here now, right? When the Earth was really, really warm a long time ago, humans weren't here. Now that we're here, how much can we tolerate? That's kind of the big question. Okay. We know that the rate of warming right now is dramatic and too quick for many species to adapt to. What we don't know is will we be able to keep up with these changes and with the things that we rely on be able to keep up with these changes. So there are some things that we know and there are some things that we don't know. Okay, and so read through that list and take a look there. Okay. When there was first topic in conversation of climate change, it's called global warming, obviously, right? We were looking at solar flares. Okay, and MIT did a study, and what they looked at were these solar flares, basically where the sun has this big flare of energy that comes out, and that energy is so intense that the energy from that is able to actually reach our planet. Okay, and so they were looking at solar flares, and they were looking at global temperatures. Okay, and they noticed that there was some correlation there, and that was kind of at the point where they said, "All right, I think we've got it. Solar flares cause the climate to warm and cool," and they kind of left it at that for a while. They weren't looking at greenhouse gases necessarily and the changes in those greenhouse gases. Okay, it wasn't until later that we started looking at temperature and carbon dioxide that they started to look at if there's a correlation there and maybe causation and delve into that deeper. As we look at deep time, talking about the last 500 million years, you can look at Earth's temperature, and it fluctuated a lot, right? And we were really, really hot, and then we cooled off quite a bit. We had an ice age, and now we're back up to here, okay? So the Earth has been a lot warmer a long time ago. Some of these things that cause the Earth to warm, huge Earth-changing events, huge intense volcanic eruptions that change the atmosphere, change the landscape, those kinds of things. And so, there were some major events a long time ago that did that. Okay. As we look at atmospheric carbon dioxide and temperature, you look at in black here CO2, right? CO2 was high, temperature was high. CO2 goes down, temperature goes down. But even this is, pretty loosely correlated at best, I think. This at least gives you some indication. But I think you need to see a graph of a smaller snapshot of time potentially to kind of get the better picture. And so let's look at just over the last, 20,000 years or so. Okay. So in the last 20,000 years, you look at temperature and you compare it to uh, carbon dioxide, and what you see is that our temperature in blue there, right? This is the end of the last ice age. We're in the ice age here. What you see is that as your temperature increased, you can kind of see pretty clearly that carbon dioxide also increased. Okay, you get to present day and you see something like this. What you see is now that our atmospheric CO2 has increased pretty dramatically, what do people expect to happen next? Well, right now we have had a CO2 spike. The next thing to happen is likely a temperature increase as well. And so I think this helps kind of get your mind around this idea that scientists do think that there is a big correlation between carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and the temperature of our planet. Okay, you look at that same sort of graph there. Now our timeline is a little bit different, but you look at temperature and carbon dioxide, and then you look at that bottom graph, which is human population, and you see that, boy, those graphs look pretty similar. It's hard not to look at that and think there seems to be some sort of correlation here between temperature, carbon dioxide, and human population. And so, as scientists look at this, they kind of scratch their head and say, it really seems like there was a relationship between temperature, carbon dioxide, and the population of our planet. All are increasing pretty dramatically, okay? One thing that isn't really looked at is methane, okay? Methane as a greenhouse gas is something like anywhere between 20 to 86 times more powerful than carbon dioxide, meaning it's much, much better at trapping that heat, okay? Why is there such a big fluctuation? Well, because methane as a gas, its ability to hold heat changes over time, right? It's better in the beginning, and then it kind of loses its punch, just like batteries, right? Batteries full of energy right away, and then they kind of lose their punch over time. Methane is the same way, really good at trapping heat for a while, and then it gets less good at it. But it's still much, much better than CO2 is, okay? And one of the issues is there's 500 times more methane in the Arctic than there is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And so there's big, big, big concerns about this methane problem, looking at that. And so where's this methane? A lot of it's locked under the oceans at pressure. And so you look here, you look at Russia, and you look at, some of this geographic area, and you'll see that, wow, there's, potentially a lot of methane, dissolved methane under the water there, right? And so you look at deep oceans and you start to get a whole new layer of greenhouse gases there. And they stay there pretty consistently. I think one of the things that we're concerned about, though, is that you can produce methane as well. And the things that produce methane are microbes, right? You remember learning about microorganisms and those things that help decay material in our nutrient cycles. Well, one of the things that they create, one carbon product, is methane. And so as things in the permafrost start to melt, maybe due to temperature increases, um, that melting permafrost now allows microbes that were frozen now to wake up and start eating the dead material in the permafrost layer and create more methane. And so there's a lot of concern about methane and what that might do to the planet. Okay, and I'll have a video there as well for you to look at. It might be helpful to see a snippet of it right now and maybe why scientists are concerned about methane.